In 2020, I stopped disposing my single-use plastic packaging paper in the household waste. Instead, I stuffed them into single-use plastic bottles and made what is known as eco-bricks. Initially, I thought I was doing something very great. Maybe I was illusioned when I started, because during this time, I did not notice a decrease in the municipal waste or a decrease in the number of dump sites. And that made me realize one thing, that despite my personal effort and my personal responsibility, no matter how much hard it was, and it was hard, I had to go back to the dustbin during the first week and fetch out the single-use plastic packaging, or even when I had visitors around. I even had specific times set apart so that I could stuff the papers inside. Not to forget, I had to find a specific stick that I protect with my life. I couldn't carry it today because I cannot risk losing it. So it made me realize that what we need is collective responsibility. And this collective responsibility involves systems, governments, companies, corporations, and governments. You see, these companies are run with the help of machines by people. Therefore, we have to incorporate both our personal responsibility and tie it all together so that we can create impactful results. So I've started from the middle. Let me take you to the start. I am Nessie. I'm an environmental and waste management consultant and a counseling psychologist. Before I got my hands dirty in waste management, I was involved in the mental practice of working with partners to work with clients who are suffering from and dealing with and being affected by mental health issues such as depression, trauma, stress, PTSD, anxiety, among other disabilities. I would have said that this is where I met cognitive behavioral therapy, but it is not. Back in campus, I first interacted with cognitive behavioral therapies and approaches, but it was in my practice that I was able to see the practicality of these approaches. So, cognitive behavioral approaches work with the focus on the interconnectivity of three main factors: our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. Life in itself is very typical. From the moment we are born, and even before then, till the moment we die, and even after then, we are involved in the continuous vicious cycle of consuming and producing. We produce so that we can consume, and after we consume, we produce, and in this case, waste. So cognitive behavioral approaches aim to deal with maladaptive practices and behaviors. In this case, the maladaptive behavior is our mentality of waste, which has been occasioned by the mushrooming illegal dump sites that we have around, the overfilling dump sites, and generally, our nonchalance to waste. So I try to tie all these things to cognitive behavioral therapy approaches and use them so that we can first become aware of our current reality and become aware of the reality we want to achieve, and finally, get to practice the actions that are needed to be able to achieve our goals. So we'll start, where do we get all our information from? The senses. From how we see waste, the dump sites, to how we see people behaving about waste from a young age, to the smell and what we associate with foul smells and waste, to how we feel when we are dirty and how we are treated when we are dirty, to the point where how we hear what people say about waste and how we see people reacting about waste, and finally, how waste tastes in our mouth. You know, like when you taste bad food. So this is where we get our information from. Sometimes it's hard to find that separation from where thoughts start and where actions start and where emotions begin. That's why cognitive behavioral approaches is such an interconnected approach. You see, life in itself is very typical. From the moment we are born till the moment we die, and before we are born and after we are died, we are involved in the continuous process of production and consumption. We produce so that we can consume, and once we consume, we produce. most importantly, waste. And it is during this young age that we begin interacting with waste and we develop our core beliefs when it comes to waste. You see, these core beliefs and practices, they end up being enforced over a period of time through repetition and become ingrained in our habits and in our culture. Our mentality of waste is marred with a lot of negative thoughts about waste, and this begins from how we treat people who work in waste and what we think about the people who work in waste. We see them as dirty people who deserve little pay and deserve little respect, so to speak. And it also extends to how we feel about waste. You see how you feel when your house is cluttered and the things are not in order. It messes up with your brain. And that's the same that happens in every aspect of our life. And all this tie in to how we act about waste. When we feel disgusted about waste, it is hard for us to go out and handle waste. Same way, if we think of waste as unnecessary, it impacts who we think is responsible for our waste. For instance, we currently think that waste is the responsibility of some other parties, not us. And that is envisioned by how we act about waste. Additionally, we have developed automatic behaviors that cause our waste. These automatic behaviors begin from how we open a bottle and immediately throw out the paper that usually covers it, to how we throw the bottle immediately after. So there's an intersectionality of our thoughts, our actions, and how we feel about waste. Cognitive behavioral approaches address the maladaptive behaviors, and in this case, these maladaptive behaviors are seen in how we have so much mushrooming dump sites, and finally, our nonchalance towards waste. Maybe at this point I can say that planting trees is actually the bare minimum. I'm not discouraging you from planting trees, but it is actually the least we can ever do to conserve our planet and to protect it. From the time we plant our trees, we have to be engaged in growing them and ensuring that they become big trees and are able to actually live. In Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, she, as has been described by the speakers before me, show how climate change intricately affects every aspect of our life, from entertainment to culture, to planning, to health, to water, and every aspect of our life. Therefore, it would be a mistake for us to actually treat waste as a separate entity and assuming it only affects one part of our life. That's why we need to integrate waste management in every aspect of our lives. In cognitive behavioral approaches, the aim is to first become aware of our maladaptive behaviors and our maladaptive thoughts and how our emotions play into it. Second, we can restructure how our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions will lead us to the desirable change. Finally, through intentionality, we can do actionable steps with the goal of attaining our actions in mind. I'll give you an example. When it comes to waste, our automatic responses is usually to throw all the waste in one bin. Yet, when we focus on the specificity of each waste, we realize that each waste has to be handled separately. For instance, food waste needs to be handled as soon as possible to ensure that it achieves it's able to be used as the resource that it is. Another aspect of restructuring our waste is changing how we perceive waste. And we can do that by seeing waste as gold and as a treasure. Because you see, waste is made from resources. And therefore, why does it have to stop being a resource once it has finished its use? So to be able, we have to restructure how we think about waste and how we perceive waste. Next, it's also about how we feel about waste. I cannot deny that some things are beyond our control. For instance, how flinching when I smell a bad thing is natural for us. However, did you know that you can change how you act towards a bad smell? When I was starting out in waste management, we did not have enough protective gear. So when we did the cleanups and we did the garbage collections, we used to do it with our hands bare. During this time, I used to make the novice mistake of smelling my hands. And trust you me, every single time, it smelled like fecal matter. And no matter how many times I washed my hands, the smell never went away. This would have prevented me from continuing in my waste management practice. Instead, what I decided to do was, I came up with the rule of never smelling my hands. So whenever I did my waste management, even after washing my hands, I never put my hands to my nose because I was sure that I will smell the fecal matter or rather let me just call it poop. I will smell the poop in my hands and I will be so disgusted I will not want to continue. And it's the same way when we were dealing with sewage and we had to clean up the sewages. I don't look like it, but I used to do a lot of sewage cleaning. And you could see all that, the refuse and all that feces. Sometimes we also saw needles. But when we focused on what we wanted to achieve, which was to ensure that we had a waste-free world, I was able to look beyond all that and actually practice the waste management. So finally, to be able to achieve a waste-free world, we must actually practice and ensure that we incorporate a waste-free lifestyle in our everyday living. As a person who agrees with what Loretta Ross says, we need to call in everyone. And I mean calling in the corporations that are the biggest contributors, the countries that are the biggest contributors to our waste crisis. We also need to call in the indigenous people, the children, and involve everyone in policy making. And when doing all this, we also need to keep in mind that our thoughts and our emotions are what will impact how we behave about waste, and as a result, will ensure that we live a waste-free life.